So I know I've already made an Oscar recap and reactions video, but I will still continue making Oscar coverage videos until I finally finish talking about every single category. So today we're going to be talking about Best Sound Editing, and the nominees for that are American Sniper, Alan Robert Murray and Bob Assman; Birdman, Martin Hernandez and Aaron Glasscock; The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies, Brent Burge and Jason Canavas; Interstellar, Richard King; and Unbroken, Becky Sullivan and Andrew De Cristofaro. I'm kind of indifferent about this list, and it's always kind of disappointing for me when I see that the nominees for Best Sound Editing and Sound Mixing are pretty much the same again. And my understanding of the difference between the two isn't perfect yet, but I know that there is a difference, so I would really have liked to see a lot more variety with the movies instead of just nominating the same movie for both categories. But as it stands, this is our list, and as usual, I will be talking about who I think deserved the award and my final prediction at the end, as well as who, of course, who actually won the award. So, first of all, at fifth place, I would put The Hobbit: The Battle of the Five Armies. Now, credit has to be given to the sound team of this movie for just the sheer amount of elements on screen that needed sound at the same time. And there's another added challenge with this movie in that there's so many there's such a variety of races and weaponry being used throughout the entire battle, which is like the whole movie. But the issue a lot of people, including myself, have with the movie in general is that it can be argued that it's more quantity over quality. So there's a lot of chaos going on screen, but there's not a lot of method to the madness. Like a lot of it just ends up feeling very numb at times. Again, kudos to them for really creating such a large scale battle, but then the authenticity and the ability of sound to make us feel is kind of lost throughout all of that. I mean, if you compare The Hobbit again to The Lord of the Rings, which used a lot of practical effects, those practical sounds really kind of put you into the moment. Here, it's just a lot of really kind of fabricated stuff, which is good, but it doesn't make us feel. Not number four, I would put American Sniper. The sound in American Sniper is very standard for a war movie, in my opinion, in that the guns are very loud and they're hard hitting, and they all do sound really good. And I think one thing people tend to forget is that the sound of firing a gun is actually much more complex than you might think, because you pull the trigger, then the bullet comes out, then the casing hits the ground, and there's the whole recoil thing, and there's a lot of stuff that goes into firing a gun. But what does set American Sniper apart from some other war movies is that there is this nice sandstorm sequence near the end, which is very, very well done. And the way some sounds are distorted and muted whenever Chris Kyle has like a post-traumatic stress disorder episode is very, very kind of unique. But in the end, ultimately, I think the sound in this movie doesn't really add that much to the story. And that might be because of how our emotional connection with Chris Kyle in the movie isn't that strong. So we're not necessarily fearing for his life. Now, number three, I'm going to put Birdman. Birdman isn't as showy in terms of sound compared to American Sniper or The Hobbit, but the crispness of every single little audio detail is really kind of surprising. It's like as you walk around with these characters in this movie, it's like you have heightened senses because you hear every single kind of conversation that floats in and out through the characters' ears. And this movie is all about the blur between fantasy and reality. And I think the sound really does help support that idea, especially in that sequence where Regan is walking down the street and Birdman starts talking to him, and then there's this giant like metal bird attacking the street. Like that's all really, really cool. Again, I'm not sure if my understanding of the difference between sound editing and sound mixing is perfect. I know it's not. Feel free to tell me what I may have missed. But for me, I feel like Birdman's sound should be credited more to sound mixing, because a lot of the sound, I believe, was recorded on set. But, I don't know, so that's why it's at number three. At number two, I'm going to put Unbroken. Now, this is another war movie, but compared to American Sniper, the scope is much, much bigger, and the sound effects are a lot more varied. There's a lot more stuff going on, especially like during the very first scene of the movie with this really great kind of plane fight or bombing sequence, which the sound there was great because it was all very abrasive. It was all really almost deafening, but in a kind of good way. And when they dropped the bombs, like you could only hear like the distant echo of things exploding. But for me, the sound in Unbroken really shines in the non-war scenes, like when they're out on the raft at sea, or in there's like a storm that comes, or whenever Louis Zamperini gets hit by the bird, like in the face or whatever. Like every single hit feels extremely painful, and it really worked in making you feel uncomfortable. However, I think that's also kind of the downfall of the movie. That's why it's my number two, because the effectiveness of the sound is ultimately kind of overused, because you spend this whole movie really just kind of watching Zamprini get abused, sometimes for no reason at all. And I understand it's a true story, it's just that it just kind of felt like overkill sometimes. And at number one, and the movie that I thought deserved to win the Oscar, was Interstellar. And Interstellar does the gravity thing where there's no sound in space, but only like the suggestion of sound through vibrations, or through, I'm not sure if I'm using it right, like the Doppler effect sound thing, yeah. But the sound in Interstellar isn't just great in space. Thankfully, it's great everywhere else also. Like the water planet that they visit, you can really kind of feel like the scale of those waves, and like just the water crashing around. The desolation of the ice planet is really, really great to the ears in kind of an opposite way also. And even back on Earth with the sandstorms and whatnot, that's all very, very well done. It really feels like you were there in the moment. And it was an extra challenge for the sound designers in Interstellar to come up with sounds for really kind of theoretical phenomena like wormholes and black holes. And I guess you can credit that more to the VFX team, but the sound designers did have to work around that and create like a believable soundscape, which I think they did. And who I really thought would win the Oscar, like my official prediction, was Interstellar, and of course I was extremely surprised that American Sniper took it. I thought the Academy would go for Interstellar because they made Gravity win last year, but hey, American Sniper won, I suppose. So those are my thoughts on the best sound editing category for this year's Oscars. Who did you think should have won? Who did you think was going to win? And how do you feel about American Sniper winning? So whatever your thoughts are, whether you agree with mine or not, please leave me a comment. Let's have a conversation.